Despite the fact that Russian-Ukrainian relations have traditionally been considered friendly despite today's conflict, this is not entirely true. There have been conflicts between Ukraine and Russia before, and today we will talk about them. After the death of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, a civil war broke out on the lands of modern Ukraine, which went down in history under the name the Ruin. So Ivan Vygotsky, a very controversial personality in the Cossack society, became the head of the Hetmanate. Vygotsky was a supporter of unification with the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth and the creation of a triune state of Poland, Lithuania, and the Russian Principality, because of which some of the Cossacks rebelled and opposed the hetman. Hetmanate and Cossack society were divided into two parts, and neighboring countries contributed to this in every possible way. So Russia sided with the rebellious Cossacks and opposed Vygotsky, and later changed sides more than once. Finally, this resulted in the division of Ukraine in two parts between the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth and Russia. By the beginning of the 18th century, most of the Ukrainian lands were finally annexed to Russia, and discontent was brewing into the Cossack society. At the same time, the northern war between Russia and Sweden began. So Ivan Mazepa, the hetman of the Cossacks, went over to the side of the Swedes in 1708. An agreement was signed between the countries proclaiming the independence of Ukraine from all countries, and Mazepa was to provide provisions and ammunition upon the arrival of the Swedes in Ukraine. He also promised to provide an army. The only battle in which Mazepa's army participated was the Battle of Poltava. The army was defeated due to a lack of ammunition and provisions, destroyed early by the Russians. Mazepa fled to the Ottoman Empire, where he soon died. In place of Mazepa came Orlik, who also swore an oath to Swedes, but his attempts failed again. However, it's worth noting that not all Cossacks were on the side of Sweden. Supporters of Ivan Skoropadsky sided with Russia. They in fact prevented Mazepa from carrying out his plans by unexpectedly attacking Baturin. The uprising of Haidamaks, which went down in history under the name Kaliyivshina, although it occurred on the territory of the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth, but as a result was suppressed by the Russian army. Prerequisites for the uprising was the centuries-old oppression of the Orthodox population in the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth. The Orthodox faith was constantly suppressed, and Catholicism was promoted to the local population. But with the coming to power of Stanislav Poniatowski, who was essentially a puppet of the Russian monarchs, he decided to proclaim the equality of all Christian movements on the lands of the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth. However, the conservative Polish gentry opposed this radically. Pogroms and murders of Orthodox Christians began. In response to this, the Cossacks started an uprising and arranged the massacre of Uman, in which many Poles and Jews were killed. As a result, in order to preserve the power of Stanislav Poniatowski, the Russian army entered the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth, which put an end to all the uprising in the region, including suppressing the Haidamaks uprising. The Soviet-Ukrainian War began at the end of 1917, in the context of the Russian Civil War, so the Bolsheviks carried out a coup. In the meantime, the creation of an independent Ukrainian People's Republic was proclaimed in Ukraine. This caused discontent of the Bolsheviks, who attempted a coup in Kiev, and after that they launched an offensive on Ukrainian lands. The Red Army began to actively move into the interior of the country, creating puppet republics on their occupied lands. They even captured Kiev, but then the Central Powers intervened in the conflict. Ukraine signed an agreement with them and they introduced their contingent of troops into the territory of Ukraine. The war continued with the end of the First World War. The Ukrainian lands were left without protection, and a couple of years later, Ukraine actually fell and was also involved in another Soviet-Polish war on the side of Poland. And in the end, the lands of Ukraine were divided between Poland and Soviet Russia. Well, the most recent open confrontation between Ukrainians and Russians was the struggle of the Ukrainian insurgent army against the Soviet government. Back in 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland and annexed the ethnic lands of Ukrainians. Initially, local residents met this news rather positively, but with the beginning of repression and the seizure of private property, the attitude towards the Soviet Union in the region became negative. With the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, some Ukrainians sided with the Germans, and the other part began to fight against everyone for the independence of Ukraine. So the armed clashes took place between the troops of the Ukrainian insurgent army and the Red Army. And with the end of the war, the rebels went underground and soon disappeared altogether.